My brother sold our mother's house using a power of attorney he got from her when she didn't even know what year it was, and now a stranger has the keys to my childhood home. I'm writing this from my aunt's spare bedroom with a suitcase of clothes and a box of documents I should never have needed to take out of my own house. If anyone here has gone through something like this, any advice would help, because I feel like I'm living someone else's nightmare. My name doesn't matter, but I'll go by Val. I'm 29 and I work as an accountant at a small firm. My brother Marcos is 38. We're the only two children of our mother, Carmen, who is now 67. Our father died of a heart attack when I was 14 and Marcos was 23. It was sudden. One day he was fixing the roof, the next we were at a funeral. My mother never fully recovered, but she kept going because she had 2 kids and a house to maintain, the house. That house is everything in this story. It's a 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it's spacious and sits in an area that has appreciated significantly over the last 15 years. My father bought it before I was born and the deed was always in my mother's name. Dad never put it in his name because he said if anything happened to him, he wanted Mom to not have to deal with probate. Turns out he was right, because when he died, the house was already hers without any legal process needed. I grew up in that house. My bedroom still has the marks on the doorframe where my dad measured my height every birthday. The backyard has a lemon tree my grandfather planted before he passed. The hallway walls have family photos going back to before I was born. It's not just a property. It's the physical memory of my entire family. Marcos left the house at 25 when he got a job in another city. He was always the charismatic one. The one who could talk anyone into anything. At family gatherings he was the center of attention, telling stories, making everyone laugh. I was the quiet one who sat in a corner with a book. When he left, I didn't feel it much because we were never that close to begin with. He lived his life and I lived mine. I stayed with my mother. At first because I was underage and had no choice. Then because I was in college and it was practical. And then, about 3 years ago, because my mother started forgetting things. At first it was small stuff. Leaving her keys in the fridge. Asking twice if she'd paid the electric bill. Calling Marcos by my father's name. I thought it was normal for her age. But it got worse. She started getting lost in the grocery store she'd been going to for 30 years. One day I found her crying in the kitchen because she couldn't remember how to make the rice she'd been cooking since she was 15. The diagnosis was early-stage Alzheimer's. She was 64 when they told us. From that diagnosis on, I became her primary caregiver. I hired a nurse who came in the mornings while I was at work, and I took over in the afternoons. Weekends were entirely mine with her. My social life basically dropped to zero. I'm not complaining about that. She's my mother and I'd do it 1,000 times over. But I need you to understand the context of what my brother did. Because while I was here cleaning, cooking, taking her to doctors, paying bills, and watching the woman who raised me slowly disappear, Marcos visited twice a year. Christmas and Mom's birthday. Sometimes not even that. When he did visit, it was all smiles and hugs. He'd bring Mom expensive gifts. He'd stay 3 days, promise he'd come more often, and then vanish for another 6 months. My mother, on her good days, would ask about him. On her bad days, she sometimes thought Marcos still lived in the house and would ask me to prepare his room. Marcos never once asked how I was doing. Never offered to help with medical expenses. Never suggested we take turns or hire more help. Once I asked him to chip in for the nurse because my salary wasn't covering everything. He told me he was going through a tough financial stretch. That was about 1.5 years ago. I didn't push it because it was never worth fighting with Marcos. It was never worth it. He always had an answer for everything and you'd end up feeling guilty for having asked in the first place. Now let's get to what happened. 3 Saturdays ago, I was in the living room with my mother watching TV. She was having a regular day. Not great, not terrible. She recognized the house, recognized me, but was a bit confused about what year it was. The doorbell rang. I opened the door and there was a man, maybe 45, wearing a button-down shirt and holding a folder. Behind him was a woman and two kids waiting by an SUV. He greeted me politely and said he was there to see the house because he wanted to measure a few things before the move. I told him he must be confused, that this house wasn't for sale. He laughed a little nervously and said of course it was, that he had purchased it 6 weeks ago. His name was Rodrigo. He pulled papers from the folder and showed me a deed of sale with a notary stamp. The property was described perfectly. The address, the dimensions, the lot number. Everything matched. And at the bottom, on the seller's line, it said my mother's name, Carmen Gutierrez de Herrera, represented by her legal representative, Marcos Antonio Herrera Gutierrez, my brother. I can't really describe what I felt. It was like the ground underneath me stopped being solid. I asked Rodrigo to wait and closed the door. I went to the room where we kept important documents. The original deed to the house wasn't there. I looked 3 times. It wasn't there. Neither was my mother's birth certificate or her official ID. I went back and opened the door. Rodrigo was still standing there, visibly uncomfortable now. I asked him how much he paid. He told me the number and I nearly collapsed. The house is easily worth 3 times what he paid. In that area, with that lot size, even being conservative, we're talking about a massive gap. Marcos had sold my mother's house for less than a third of its actual market value. I explained to Rodrigo that my mother had Alzheimer's, that I lived here, and that we had no knowledge of any sale. The man went pale. He told me everything had been handled through Marcos, that Marcos told him his mother wanted to sell because she was moving to an assisted living facility. And that he as the eldest son had the legal authority to manage everything. Rodrigo had even spoken to someone on the phone who Marcos said was my mother, confirming the sale. It was not my mother. I asked him to give me a day to look into it and not to come with his family just yet. He agreed, though he told me that legally the house was already his and he didn't want trouble. He left and I sat down on the front steps and stayed there for I don't know how long. I called Marcos. No answer. I texted him, I know what you did with the house. Call me. He read it. Didn't respond. I called 3 more times. The 4th time, the phone was off. I called my Aunt Lucia, my mother's sister. I told her everything through tears I couldn't control. My aunt was quiet for a long time. Then she said one thing, I'm not surprised. She told me that Marcos had asked her for money 3 times in the last 2 years. The first time she lent him $5,000 and he never paid it back. The other 2 times she refused. Marcos told her he had a sure investment. My aunt never told me because she didn't want to worry me. I wish she had. That night I didn't sleep. I went through everything I could find. I discovered that Marcos had visited my mother 4 months ago, on a Friday afternoon, when the nurse had already left and I was at a work training that ran late. He told my mother he needed her signature on some insurance papers for the house. My mother mentioned it to me the next day, something like your brother came by and had me sign some things, but I assumed it was confusion on her part because Marcos hadn't told me he was visiting. I didn't think anything of it. That mistake is going to haunt me for a long time. What my mother signed that day was a general power of attorney giving Marcos the authority to sell, mortgage, and dispose of any real property in her name. A power of attorney that should never have been granted because my mother did not have the mental capacity to understand what she was signing. But Marcos took her to a notary. Not our family notary, but one in another part of town we'd never used. The notary certified that my mother was of sound mind and fully competent. That is a lie. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with my mother knows she's not in a condition to sign anything. But a notary who didn't know her, one Marcos probably paid enough, certified the opposite. On Monday I went to see a lawyer recommended by a coworker. Her name is Ms. Fuentes. I brought everything I had, my mother's diagnosis, receipts from medical appointments, prescriptions for Alzheimer's medication dated before the power of attorney, and photos of the power of attorney documents that Rodrigo had let me photograph. Ms. Fuentes reviewed everything for an hour, looked at me, and said, "This is fraud, abuse of a vulnerable person, and potentially forgery. Your brother is going to have very serious problems." She explained that we had several paths. First, challenge the power of attorney on the grounds of my mother's incapacity at the time of signing. If the power of attorney is invalid, the sale is also invalid. Second, file a criminal complaint against Marcos for fraud and abuse of a vulnerable individual. Third, investigate the notary who authorized the power of attorney knowing, or having the obligation to know, that my mother was not competent. The complication is Rodrigo. Rodrigo paid real money for this house and has a deed that looks legal. If we void the sale, Rodrigo loses the house and the money. Ms. Fuentes told me Rodrigo would have to sue Marcos for the money he paid, but that's not my problem. My problem is getting my mother's house back. Even so, I feel for Rodrigo. The man bought a house for his family believing everything was legitimate. Marcos didn't just rob us. He robbed Rodrigo too. Before the consultation ended, Ms. Fuentes asked me something that turned my stomach. Does your brother have a history of money problems? Gambling, drugs, debt? I told her I didn't know. She replied, "Find out, because people don't sell their sick mother's house for a third of its value unless they're desperate." Right now I'm at my aunt's place because Ms. Fuentes advised me not to stay at the house for the time being, since there's legally a deed in Rodrigo's name and there could be complications if he decides to assert his rights while we sort this out. My mother is with me. She's confused because she doesn't understand why she's not at home. Yesterday she asked me if we had moved and when we were going back. I told her soon. Marcos still hasn't responded. He's read every message I've sent but hasn't answered a single one. Every time I see those blue check marks without a reply, my blood boils a little more. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since my original post and I have quite a bit to share. I'll start with Marcos because I know that's what you want to hear. He finally spoke, but not to me. He called my Aunt Lucia 4 days after I tried to reach him. He didn't call me, the person who lives in the house he sold, the person who takes care of the mother he defrauded. He called my aunt because he thought she'd be easier to handle. He doesn't know my aunt as well as he thinks. According to what my aunt told me, Marcos started the conversation like nothing had happened. Asked how she was, how the weather was, whether she'd seen Sunday's game. My aunt let him talk for about 3 minutes and then said, word for word, "Marcos, you sold your mother's house. Talk or I hang up." The tone shifted. His version was as follows, and I need you to read this with the same disbelief I felt hearing it. He says he sold the house because it was what was best for everyone. That my mother needed professional care that only an assisted living facility could provide. That the house was deteriorating and it was better to sell before it lost more value. That he planned to use the money to pay for a top-tier facility for Mom and split the rest between the two of us. I asked my aunt if Marcos mentioned why, if everything was so noble, he did it in secret. Why he didn't consult me. Why he sold for a third of the value. Why he used an unfamiliar notary. Why he had a woman with Alzheimer's sign legal documents. My aunt asked him every one of those questions. Marcos said I was too emotional about the house and would never have agreed to sell. That he sold at that price because he needed to close fast. And that the notary was one recommended by a friend. My aunt responded, "So where's the money then?" Marcos said it was in an account and he was going to use it for the facility. My aunt asked for proof. Marcos said he'd send it later. He never did. What he did do was text me that same night. The first message since all of this started. It said, "Val, I know you're angry, but everything has an explanation. We need to talk as a family, no lawyers. Lawyers just complicate things. Trust me. Trust me." The man who sold my mother's house behind my back was asking me to trust him. I forwarded the message to my lawyer without replying. She said under no circumstances should I respond and that I absolutely should not meet with him without legal representation present. She explained that his offer to talk without lawyers was a textbook sign of someone who knows they can't defend what they did in a legal setting. Meanwhile, the investigation progressed. Ms. Fuentes obtained an order to review the bank transactions related to the sale. What we found eliminated any remaining doubt I had about my brother's intentions. The money from the sale was deposited into an account in Marcos's name. Not a joint account, not a trust, not anything that suggested the money was being held for my mother. His personal account. Of that money, 40% was transferred within the first 10 days to a company that, after investigation, turned out to be an online betting platform. Marcos is a gambler. Not the kind who goes to casinos on Friday nights. The kind who bets from his phone at 3 a.m. on a soccer match on another continent. Another 25% went to a maxed-out credit card. The charges on that card were for expensive restaurants, designer clothing stores, and a trip to Cancun 2 months ago. The Cancun trip he took while I was asking him to help with our mother's medical expenses. The remaining 35% was transferred to someone named Claudia Rios. I have no idea who Claudia Rios is, but my lawyer says it's likely Marcos's girlfriend or someone connected to his debts. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was allocated to a care facility for my mother. Not a single cent. The assisted living story was as big a lie as the sale itself. We also investigated the notary. His name is Espinoza. Ms. Fuentes made some calls and it turns out Espinoza has 2 prior complaints with the notary board for irregularities in legal documents. One was dismissed and the other resulted in a formal reprimand. Not exactly a notary with a sterling reputation. My lawyer believes Marcos specifically sought him out because he knew Espinoza wouldn't ask too many questions. We're preparing a formal complaint that could cost Espinoza his license. The medical evaluation of my mother was the hardest part. A neurologist appointed by the court evaluated her for 2 hours. I was present the whole time. My mother couldn't remember the name of the current president. She thought we were in 2018. She didn't recognize a recent photo of Marcos. When they asked if she remembered signing a power of attorney, she said no. When they explained what a power of attorney was, she said she would never sign anything like that without asking me first. The neurologist's report was unambiguous. My mother did not have the cognitive capacity to grant a power of attorney on the date it was signed. Her deterioration was progressive and consistent with an Alzheimer's diagnosis that predated the signing by at least a year. The notary should have noticed. Anyone with 2 functioning eyes would have noticed. Ms. Fuentes filed the lawsuit to void the power of attorney and, consequently, the sale. She also filed the criminal complaint against Marcos. Rodrigo, the buyer, called me a week ago. He was upset. His lawyer had explained that if the power of attorney is voided, the sale is null and he loses the house but also the money he paid Marcos, because that money no longer exists. Rodrigo blamed me. He said I was ruining his family. I explained, as calmly as I could, that the person who ruined his family was my brother, not me, and that he should take action against Marcos accordingly. He didn't take it well. He hung up on me. I understand his anger. It's a terrible situation for him. He bought a house in good faith, paid his money, planned a life there. And now it's being taken away because my brother is a con artist. But the house is my mother's. I can't sacrifice her only asset because my brother scammed someone else. My mother has been worse these last couple of weeks. I don't know if it's the change of environment or the stress she must be sensing even if she can't articulate it. She's well cared for at my aunt's, but it's not her home. She gets up at night looking for her kitchen. Yesterday she called my aunt by my name and called me by the name of a cousin who died years ago. The neurologist says stress can accelerate the decline. Marcos sent another message this week. It said, "This can all be resolved within the family. I can return the money if you give me time. Don't get lawyers involved, Val, you're going to ruin your own brother. Return the money." The money he already gambled away, spent, and gave to his girlfriend. Where exactly was he going to get it from? I didn't respond. My lawyer says every message he sends is evidence and to let him keep talking to himself. She's right. Every message he sends contradicts the last one more. First it was what was best for everyone. Now it's I can return the money. The truth crumbles with every word he types. Update 2. It's been a little over a month since the last update and things have moved significantly, both legally and personally. Let's start with the hearing. The first hearing in the civil case to void the power of attorney and the sale took place last week. My lawyer prepared me well, but nothing actually prepares you for seeing your brother in a courtroom. Marcos showed up with a lawyer who looked expensive. Dark blue suit, oversized watch, leather briefcase. I found out later this attorney charges premium rates. Where Marcos got the money to pay him is anyone's guess, or maybe not, considering proceeds from the house sale were likely still floating around. What struck me was seeing Marcos himself. He'd lost weight. Not dramatically, but it showed in his face. Dark circles under his eyes. When he entered the courtroom, he scanned for me. I was sitting on the other side with Ms. Fuentes. He tried to smile at me. That smile he always deployed when he wanted everyone to think he was the good guy. I didn't return it. The hearing lasted longer than I expected. Marcos's lawyer argued that my mother had granted the power of attorney during a lucid interval, that Alzheimer's patients have windows where they can make informed decisions, and that Marcos acted in good faith believing his mother wanted to sell. He presented as evidence an audio recording of a woman who was supposedly my mother saying she authorized the sale. The voice was similar, but something sounded off. My lawyer requested that the recording's authenticity be verified. Ms. Fuentes countered with the neurological evaluation, with the prescriptions for Alzheimer's medication that my mother had been taking since before the power of attorney was signed, with statements from the nurse and 3 neighbors confirming my mother's visible decline, and with the bank statements showing the money went to gambling and personal expenses, not to any care facility. The judge heard everything, reviewed the documents, and made a preliminary ruling. He ordered a temporary suspension of the sale's effects until the case was resolved. This means Rodrigo can't move into the house or sell it. And that we can go back. He also ordered a forensic analysis of the audio recording and a deeper investigation into Notary Espinosa. Marcos was furious when he heard the ruling. He stood up like he was going to say something. His lawyer grabbed his arm and sat him back down. But afterwards, outside the courtroom, he couldn't hold it in. He approached me when Ms. Fuentes had gone to the restroom. He said in a low voice but with a rage I'd never seen in him before, "You're making the worst mistake of your life. You think you're the perfect daughter, but you're nothing but a bitter woman who clung to that house because she has nothing else. Mom would have given the house to me if she could think straight." I didn't respond. I just took out my phone and started recording. When he saw what I was doing, he backed away quickly. He left with his lawyer without another word. My lawyer now has that recording. What happened after the hearing was worse than I imagined. Marcos didn't stay quiet. He called relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people he hadn't spoken to in years. He told them his version, that I was exploiting our mother's illness to keep the house for myself, that he was only trying to help, and that I was going after him legally out of jealousy because he was always Mom's favorite. Some relatives bought it. A paternal uncle called me to say I was tearing the family apart and should let Marcos explain himself. I hung up when he started telling me that women don't understand business, but other family members saw through it. My cousin Diana, who is a social worker, called to tell me that what Marcos did is textbook financial abuse of a vulnerable adult and that she sees cases like this every month at her job. She offered to serve as an expert witness if we needed her. Other cousins simply told me they were there for whatever I needed. The investigation into Marcos revealed more than we wanted to know. My lawyer hired a private investigator, which was necessary to strengthen the criminal case. What he found is a disaster. Marcos has debts in an amount I'm embarrassed to type. Debts owed to private lenders. Not banks. The kind of people who don't send collection letters but rather make visits to your door. His job, which he always told us was going great, he'd actually lost 8 months ago. He was fired for repeated tardiness and for using his work computer to access gambling sites. He told us nothing. He kept calling at Christmas like everything was fine. Claudia Rios, the person he wired money to, is his girlfriend. They live together, or lived together, in an apartment they stopped paying rent on 2 months ago. Claudia doesn't have a job. According to what the investigator found, Claudia is the one who introduced Marcos to online gambling about 3 years ago. Before her, Marcos didn't gamble. After her, he lost his job, his savings, and now his mother's house. The information on the notary was equally damning. Espinosa didn't just certify the power of attorney. According to a former employee of his office who spoke with the investigator, Marcos brought my mother in when she was clearly not in any condition to be signing legal documents. The former employee says my mother asked 3 times where she was and that Marcos kept telling her, "We're at the bank, Mom, just sign here." The employee alerted Espinosa, but Espinosa waved him off. The employee quit shortly after. My lawyer has him lined up as a witness. Police brought Marcos in for questioning regarding the criminal complaint. He showed up with his expensive lawyer, who is apparently still billing him even though I have no idea how Marcos is paying. According to what we were told, Marcos denied everything. He said his mother understood what she was signing, that the sale was legitimate, and that I was a resentful sister. But when they asked about where the money went, he started contradicting himself. First he said it was saved. Then that he'd invested it. Then that he'd used it to pay family debts. The investigators already had the bank statements. Every lie he told was already disproven by the numbers. On a personal level, we moved back into the house. The judge authorized it because the suspension allows us to stay while the case is pending. The first night back was strange. My mother walked in and sat in her favorite armchair like she'd never left. She turned on the TV and asked me to make her a coffee. It was the first moment of normalcy in weeks. I locked myself in the kitchen and cried while making the coffee, but from relief, Rodrigo didn't take it well. His lawyer tried to oppose the suspension, but the judge was clear. Preliminary evidence strongly suggests the power of attorney is invalid, and therefore the sale is presumptively void. Rodrigo texted me saying he was also a victim. I responded, for the one and only time, that he was right. He was also a victim of my brother, and that he should act accordingly. I don't know if he did. Marcos sent one last message before I blocked him. It said, "When Mom dies, that house belongs to me by half." All I did was speed up the inevitable. Think about that. I read it, took a screenshot, sent it to my lawyer, and blocked him. Update 3. 2 months later, and I have the most important update of all. The civil case was resolved first. The judge voided the power of attorney. The neurological evaluation was decisive, but what sealed everything was the testimony of the former employee from the notary's office. The man showed up to the hearing, visibly nervous but resolute, and described exactly what he saw: an elderly woman, confused, who did not know where she was or what she was signing, and a son who repeatedly told her to sign quickly while the notary looked the other way. The audio recording that Marcos's lawyer had presented was also analyzed. The forensic report found that the voice belonged to a woman significantly younger than my mother. Most likely Claudia. The recording had been edited to make the speaker sound older. My lawyer presented this as additional evidence of premeditation and fraud. With the power of attorney voided, the sale was declared null and void. The deed in Rodrigo's name was cancelled and the property reverted to my mother's name. The judge was very pointed in his ruling. The protection of the rights of individuals in a state of vulnerability is an obligation that supersedes any commercial transaction. A power of attorney granted by a person without the cognitive capacity to understand its consequences is, from its inception, non-existent. Rodrigo lost the house, but the judge ordered Marcos to repay the full purchase price to him. Since Marcos doesn't have that money, an attachment was issued against any assets or future income he might have. Rodrigo also filed a separate civil claim against Marcos for damages. I don't know how that's going because we stopped being in contact. I hope he recovers something, but realistically, Marcos has nothing to attach. The criminal case moved in parallel. Marcos was arrested 1 week after the civil ruling. They picked him up at Claudia's apartment. According to the report, when police arrived, Marcos tried to climb out a back window. He didn't get very far. The charges are aggravated fraud, financial abuse of a vulnerable person, use of a forged document, the power of attorney, and fabrication of evidence, the audio recording. His expensive lawyer dropped him. Apparently Marcos owed him 3 months of fees. He was assigned a public defender. The criminal hearing was harder than anything I've lived through. Seeing your brother sitting in the defendant's chair, wearing wrinkled clothes, without the spark that always lived in his eyes, is something that doesn't translate easily to words. A part of me, the part that remembers the brother who taught me to ride a bicycle when I was 6, wanted it all to be a nightmare. But another part, the one who has spent the last several months cleaning up the wreck he created while my mother declines, knew this was necessary. Marcos spoke in his own defense. It was the first time I heard something resembling an apology from him, though it wasn't exactly that. He said he had made bad decisions. That the debts had cornered him. That dangerous people were threatening him and he needed money urgently. That he never wanted to hurt our mother and thought that if he sold the house and paid off his debts, he'd find a way to make it up to us later. He cried while he spoke. I don't know if the tears were real. What he didn't say, and what was made clear by the evidence, was that he chose to rob us before facing his own problems. He had months to ask for help. He had months to tell us what was happening. Instead, he extracted a power of attorney from a woman who didn't know what she was signing, sold her house for scraps, and spent the money on bets and luxuries while I was buying my mother's medication on an accountant's salary. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison. The crime carried a potentially heavier sentence due to the aggravating factor of the victim's vulnerability, but the public defender negotiated a reduction since Marcos had no prior record. Still, 4 years. My brother will be 42 when he gets out. Notary Espinoza permanently lost his license. The complaint to the notary board, combined with the former employee's testimony and the court's ruling, was sufficient. He also faces criminal charges for his role. But his case is being handled separately. Claudia disappeared. Not literally, but she left the apartment she shared with Marcos and nobody knows where she went. She wasn't called to testify because she technically wasn't a party to the sale, but the voice analysis of the audio recording strongly suggests she's the one who impersonated my mother on the phone. If they find her, she could face forgery charges. My mother, who is what matters most to me in this entire story, has had a stable month since we moved back. Not good, but stable. She has days when she recognizes me and days when she doesn't. Last week she called me by my name, took my hand, and said, "Thank you for taking care of me, sweetheart." I don't know if she understood everything that had happened or if she just sensed that something bad was over. But it was enough. On Ms. Fuentes' advice, I began the legal process to be appointed my mother's official guardian. It's a long procedure and emotionally terrible because you're essentially asking a judge to declare that your mother can't take care of herself. But it's necessary so that no one, not Marcos when he gets out, not anyone else, can ever do anything like this again. Update 4. I'm writing this as a close. Not because the story is completely over, but because the hardest chapters are behind me and I need to let go of what's left. Guardianship was approved 3 weeks ago. I'm officially my mother's legal guardian. It was the saddest legal proceeding of my life. Sitting in front of a judge and explaining that my mother cannot make decisions for herself, while she sat next to me smiling without understanding what we were doing there, was devastating. But it's done. The house and all her assets are protected under my legal custody. Nobody can touch them without a court order. Marcos wrote me a letter from prison. I received it 2 weeks ago. I wasn't expecting it. 3 pages, handwritten. His handwriting was always bad, but now it was worse, like his hand was shaking. I read the whole thing. I owe that to myself more than to him. In the letter, he didn't make excuses. That was the first thing I noticed. He didn't say it was because of the debts or Claudia influenced me. He said that he started gambling 3 years ago when he lost a big project at work and felt like a failure. That at first the bets were small and gave him a rush that his life didn't. That when he started losing, he bet more to win back what he'd lost. The classic cycle. By the time he realized he had a problem, he owed more money than he could earn in 2 years. People were threatening him. Claudia, who had the same problem, encouraged him to keep going instead of seeking help. What hurt me most was a paragraph about the day he got my mother to sign. He wrote that while they were at the notary's office, my mother held his hand and said, "Are you okay, son? You look tired." And that he answered, "I'm fine, Mom, just sign here." He says that moment follows him every night. I don't know whether to believe him, but I want to believe him on that at least. He didn't ask for forgiveness directly. He said he knew he had no right to ask for it. That what he did was beyond repair. That he hoped Mom was doing well and that I would find a way to be happy despite what he put us through. The letter ended with, "I know that when I get out, I won't have a family to come home to. I earned that. But if someday you find it in you to let me see Mom, even once, even behind glass, it would be more than I deserve." I haven't responded. I don't know if I will. Part of me wants to believe that my brother, the real one, the one who existed before the gambling and Claudia and all of this, is still in there somewhere. But another part knows that person chose to rob his sick mother rather than ask me for help. And that second part is louder: the house is safe. I hired a security company that installed cameras and an alarm system. Changed every lock. The deed is in a bank safe deposit box. No one is going to threaten this place again. The nurse now comes full-time. I picked up freelance accounting work for small businesses on evenings and weekends. With that I can cover the nurse, the medications, and the household expenses without touching savings. I'm tired most of the time, but it's a tired with purpose. Not the hollow exhaustion of not knowing if I was going to lose my home. My Aunt Lucia comes every Sunday with enough food to last the week. She says it's her way of helping because she can't do more. I've told her she does so much already, but she insists it's not enough. My cousin Diana comes every other weekend and stays the night so I can rest or go out. The first time I went to dinner with a friend after all these months. It felt like I was committing a crime just from how unfamiliar it was. I don't know much about Marcos's life in prison and I don't plan to. His letter is the only contact we've had. Sometimes I think about him and I feel a mix of emotions that doesn't have a name. It's not hate, because I can't hate my brother. It's not sadness exactly, because what he did was a choice, not a misfortune. It's something between disappointment and grief. As if the person who was my brother had died, and in his place remains someone I don't recognize. Rodrigo, the buyer, reached out one final time. He called to tell me he'd found another house, smaller but in good shape, and that his family was okay. He apologized for blaming me at the beginning. I wished him well sincerely. It wasn't his fault. Marcos had used us both. My mother had a good day yesterday. She recognized me all morning. We had breakfast together in the kitchen the way we used to when I was a kid. She asked about Marcos and I told her he was working far away. She doesn't need to know the truth. The truth would do nothing for her except cause pain she can't process. At some point I'll have to decide what to do when Marcos gets out. Whether I let him see Mom. Whether I let him step foot in this house again. Whether I let him be part of what remains of this family. But that's a decision for years from now, and right now I have enough with today. What I can say is this: if anyone reading this has a family member with a cognitive illness, make sure the legal paperwork is in order before someone needs it. File for guardianship early. Don't wait for something like this to happen. Trust within a family is a beautiful thing, but legal preparedness is more reliable. My mother trusted both her children equally. One of them cared for her and the other robbed her. The difference between me recovering the house and losing it forever came down to a lawyer, some prescriptions, and a former notary's employee who had the courage to speak up. The lemon tree in the backyard bore fruit last week. I made a pitcher of lemonade with the first lemons of the season. I poured my mother a glass in the same cup my grandfather used to use. She drank it, looked at me, and said, "This tastes like home," and she's right. It tastes like home because it is our home. And it's going to stay that way.